through various initiatives and projects. Prabha Khaitan Foundation's each endeavor reflects its keen interest to further this cause. The Foundation's anthem portrays the true spirit of Indian philosophy, unity in diversity. Here, the poetic genius of Rabindranath Tagore flows into the folk music of Rajasthan, and Dadra fuses with Kajri. True to the spirit of the Foundation, we promote local artisans when it's time to show appreciation to our patrons and guests by endorsing their products. At our events, we like to serve local foods to soak in the smell and flavor of the place. To create awareness in the community, we uphold one pressing social issue every month. This endeavor is appropriately named as Cause of the Month. This month, we are endorsing National Cancer Awareness Day. Through the words, "Don't let pain define you, let it refine you," we are trying to show our support for those who have faced the malignant disease either themselves or otherwise. Today we have with us Mr. Vaibhav Jagdish Purandare. Vaibhav is the senior editor at the Times of India and is also the author of several books like Savarkar, The True Story of the Father of Hindutva, Bal Thackeray and the Rise of the Shiv Sena, Sachin Tendulkar, A Definitive Biography. He has a passion for public affairs, politics, history, culture, and the global and national landscape, which is reflected through his many literary works. In conversation with him, we have film journalist, festival curator, author, and National Film Award recipient, Ms. Ratnottama Sengupta. This event is presented by Shree Cements Limited and is in association with Taj Bengal, Kolkata. The media partner for the event is My Kolkata, The Telegraph Online. Today's session is conducted following all COVID protocols. I would request the audience to keep their protective masks on, maintain physical distance at all times. Kindly keep your phones on mute. And if you happen to click pictures, please don't forget to tag us on our various social media at Prabha Khaitan Foundation. Now, without wasting any more time, I request you all to sit back, relax, and enjoy the session. Over to you.
Us, in a conversation with the author of Hitler and India, I was hit. I was hit because I scratched my head to find reasons why Hitler would be of interest to a 21st century India. But the minute I got the book in my hand, I got the answer. Because it is an amazing fact, and I've been amazed by this fact for the last 50 years, I think, since I was in college, that Mein Kampf continues to be on the bestseller list of books in India. In Bengal, I can understand, and we'll come to that later, right, Vaibhav?
Yeah.
In Bengal, I can understand the interest in Hitler, but an interest in Hitler for someone young and living in Maharashtra, born and raised, I guess, also. But then, as I started leafing, there are certain areas that caught my interest, and also it took me back in my mind to some of the names that have been intertwined in my mind from Hitler's Germany, some Indian names that have stayed on since the Hitler days. It's clear, right, what I'm saying? But the words that obviously draws us all to the book, first and foremost, Aryan. Hitler and Aryan, I think, are synonymous. I mean, his entire crusade, for pure races, and going back in time, the debates and conversations we used to have about Aryans, and also another very interesting conversation I had with Mr. Kalyan Roy. Calcutta people know him. He's the author of No Country. Vaibhav may or may not have come across the book. But we had a conversation where he had talked about how Iran, people from Iran actually, spread out, and Iran, Ireland, America, Iran through Northwest India, and so on and so forth, which is a fascinating journey actually. So that is one journey. Here, of course, it is amusing to find in the index pages you'll see about a group that, I'm just laying out the roadmap.
Please.
Bear with me for 2 minutes. About a group Hitler had sent, or he knew that a group had come to Tibet to trace the origins of Aryans. So to me it seemed a little bit interesting, origin of Aryans in Tibet, but more you'll hear from Weber, who's actually not only gone into, and to write you have to really know what you're writing and talking about. So that is one area. The other is the symbol swastika. On my many visits to Germany, it has always intrigued me how so many people across Europe, particularly the western part of Europe, but across Europe and particularly Germany, people, they shudder when they see the swastika sign. Although swastika for us Indians is a totally different thing. It's a very prosperity, not only prosperity, it's an auspicious sign, symbol. Anyway, so we'll come to that also. And of course, we will come to names that have stayed on, whether through fiction or through life stories. Dhyan Chand, of course Netaji, but also Gandhiji, because I guess they are inseparable. The two heads of, two different, a bird perhaps, with two heads, of polar differences. So to start with, without taking much time, I'm sure everybody wants to know, you talk about how you came to the subject. Yeah.
Hello. Is this working? Is it working?
I think you have to switch it on. Switch it on.
Now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, thank you for the very nice introduction, Ratnottama. And it's my honor and privilege to be here. Thank you to the Prabha Khaitan Foundation for inviting me here for this lovely function here. And it's a beautiful place that we are sitting at. So honored and privileged to be here. Ratnottama correctly said that Indians have a certain fascination for Adolf Hitler. I feel that's principally because of 3 or 4 reasons, some of which she outlined. The first reason is that Hitler fought against the British in World War II, and because the British were ruling India at that point in time, we appear to have had the assumption that he was in favor of the Indian struggle for political liberation from the British Raj. The second reason we have this assumption is a photograph that's embedded in our national consciousness, not only in the Bengali consciousness, but in our national consciousness, and that's the picture of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose shaking hands with Adolf Hitler during the Second World War, when Netaji had gone to Germany to seek Nazi Germany's help in the fight for India's independence on account of the war that was taking place at that point in time. The third reason, as Ratnottama correctly said, are the 2 words or symbols. One is the word Aryan. The word Aryan is derived from the Sanskrit word Arya, as we all know. And we feel that because it's derived from the word Arya, then Hitler may have thought of us as Aryans. That we were among the chosen ones. And the symbol of swastika, which like Ratnottama said, is an auspicious symbol in India. And not just in India, but in various parts of the world. And the Nazis appear to have taken that symbol. All of this has led us to assume, and increasingly for the younger generation, which I hope I represent, to assume that Hitler was a friend of the Indian people and a supporter of India's war or fight for political liberation from the British Empire. Now it so happened that about a decade ago I was reading Hitler's autobiography, which is a bestseller in India, perennial bestseller. Whichever bookstore you go to, one book you're sure to find is Mein Kampf. There may not be other very famous books there, but Mein Kampf will definitely be there and it will be prominently displayed there. It's one of the prominent signs of Indian book culture, ironical, popular book culture. So, like
Even on footpaths.
even a footpath, exactly. So you'll find it everywhere.
Yeah.
So I picked it up about 10, 12 years ago and started reading it. Of course, I bought a copy in childhood, never got down to reading it, but kept it at home. Like all of us have done that, I'm sure, because I'm narrating a story that's familiar here, to an extent, of course. But I started reading it and I really was plodding through it because it's a difficult text. And unless
Bad piece of writing.
it's a bad piece of writing. You're absolutely right. That it's a bad piece of writing because you really struggle through the book. And one of the reasons it's a difficult piece of writing is that unless you understand very specific contexts that Hitler's talking about, contexts that are all about those times and which are totally irrelevant today and which we don't even discuss today, then it's impossible to figure out what he's trying to say and to follow the train of his thought. That is why, the style of writing, which is bad, he never wrote the book, by the way. He dictated it to Rudolf Hess in prison. He never wrote it. And Rudolf Hess wrote it down. And then there was a priest, Catholic priest who then edited the book, and he said it was so bad that I really had to work really hard on it and make it slightly better. So this is the really sophisticated version that we have. So we can imagine how the original must have been. And Father Temple, who edited the book, of course, was later killed by Hitler. Who rewrote the book and made it slightly better, was killed. But that's an aside. So I was reading the book, plodding through it, and suddenly, in the second volume of the book, I come across this passage about India. And I'm startled. I'm startled because I've been brought up to believe that, the Germans were fighting the British, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose went there, and all of that, and all of the other reasons that I mentioned, I had in my mind's eye the picture of Netaji meeting Hitler. And the passage about India in Hitler's autobiography is completely anti-India. He's abusive about Indians, he criticizes Indians, he criticizes the Indian movement for freedom. He goes to the extent of saying that Indians do not deserve freedom. He says that when the Nazi party was growing, a number of people from India approached us seeking our help for the cause of Indian independence, and I told them strictly I told my party people not to entertain these people and keep them at a distance because these are pretentious, and he uses that term, the Oriental fakirs and Asiatic fakirs. And firstly, they do not represent India, and even if they do, I don't want to have anything to do with them because they are racially inferior. And I was taken aback naturally because for my generation, for a previous generation, perhaps this is a known thing. But even there, I don't see too much evidence of this being discussed a great deal. And here's this book, which is a bestseller, and this is what he writes. So, the question I ask myself is that all that is to be seen, or is there more to be seen elsewhere? And I started looking into the German archives. I started looking at the Nazi party archives, right from the party's earliest days, after the Second World War. 1918, 1919.
Berlin, did you?
Berlin, Munich, and all over the place. The fortunate thing about the manner in which the internet has democratized the world is that earlier I may have needed to be a really rich man to be able to go all over the place or to be sponsored by somebody. But I could actually sit here and get all the archival material thanks firstly to the preservation of that material by those people, and secondly to the cooperation that they extend even long distance to you. So you ask for the the rarest of rare files, they will click a picture, send them across to you. They will send they have put plenty of materials online, which of course I had to get about 1,000 pages translated.
Don't mind my this very brief interruption. The reason I asked is I was amazed to find in Berlin, like you said, that what they have preserved in the archives.
Yeah.
I actually went and saw an exhibition of paintings that he had confiscated and were to be burned. Books he had burned.
Yeah.
Books, of course, there were multiple editions. So somewhere else in the world you had in Oxford, Cambridge, elsewhere. But even paintings, and that was amazing. He had called them the decadent art. So
Yeah.
the way that has been preserved, because I mentioned Berlin, because of Berlin's history of division and the fall of the wall and so on. Sorry.
Right. So when I looked at all those documents, I was taken aback even further, because we would all imagine that India was somewhere at the edge of Hitler's political consciousness. He barely would have ever thought about India, except when Netaji went there and engaged in a conversation with him, or when we were getting in touch with Hitler to seek assistance for our freedom struggle. Surprisingly, right from the year 1919, the year in which he joins the Nazi party, then gradually takes it over, right through his totally controversial political and military career, Hitler talks about and writes about India very regularly in his career, right through his career, from 1919 through the years of the Third Reich, and almost up until he commits suicide in a Berlin bunker. He's time and again talking about India, he's talking about the Indian people, he's talking about the
1919
Indian civilization.
What?
He was
He was a soldier. He was.
No, he left in 19 because he suffered an attack, a gas attack in the World War, and he was hospitalized and he could not join back again. But he won the Iron Cross, and then in 1918 they were all disillusioned because of Germany's defeat and looking for some way out of the frustration that they were experiencing. And then in 1919 he goes to Munich, and he finds that there's this party that people are talking about. He attends one of the meetings of the party in this beer hall, and when somebody is speaking there, he suddenly intervenes and speaks with tremendous passion. And the founder of the party, one of the founders, Anthony Drexler, is extremely impressed by the manner in which this young man is speaking, and asks him to join the party. And subsequently, Hitler sidelines Drexler himself and takes over the party. But right from 1919 to the growing years, through the growing years of the Nazi party, through the years of the Third Reich, and up until his suicide in the bunker in Berlin, he is constantly talking and writing about India. So not only is there plenty of stuff about India in his autobiography, which unfortunately we never discuss, despite the fact that we discuss Hitler all the time, and despite the fact that the book is a bestseller and in everybody's homes. Number two, we never talk about the kind of speeches that he made, where he mentioned India, in relation to the British Empire, where he spoke about how he was very proud of the fact that the British were ruling over this massive subcontinent with just a small team of officials. And what ultimately emerges, the picture after you do all that research, is of a man, of Adolf Hitler, who not only openly expresses admiration for the British Empire, but holds up the example of India for Nazi Germany, an example for Nazi Germany to follow. Hitler very famously said during the Second World War that Russia will be Germany's India. That means what the British did in India, we have to do in Russia. And right in his early years in power, he's talking about how the British Empire has achieved its greatness because of its racial qualities. Now Hitler is very clear about how the world is going to be divided. It's going to be divided between three powers, and he keeps saying this right from his early years in his political life. Nazi Germany, once the Nazis come to power, they will take over Eastern Europe and control it. They will take over Russia and control it. So that's in the hands of the Nazis or Germany. The British will rule over India, the jewel in the crown, which Hitler is so proud of. Look at them, look at how they achieved it. This is how you're supposed to do it. The example that we have to emulate, he says to his Nazi party colleagues. Role model. And the third, and he is pretty confident about the fact that Britain won't intervene if Germany goes on to conquer in the eastern parts of Europe and Russia, provided we do not touch Britain's possessions elsewhere in Asia and elsewhere. So he wants this kind of arrangement. In fact, an alliance. He openly talks about an alliance with Britain. And the third power that will rule the earth is the United States of America, and they will take part of that part. They will take care of that part of the world. So the world is going to be neatly divided into two powers: Germany, Britain, and America. And what is the distinguishing quality of these three powers? It will be the white man's rule over all of this earth.
And where did Japan fit into this?
Well, the Nazis called them the yellow race and made very racist remarks. But later on, of course, in the war, things changed. So Hitler takes his ideas about India from a British political philosopher, Houston Chamberlain. He is a Britisher who lives in the 19th century, and he is so much an admirer of the German people that he renounces his British citizenship and accepts German citizenship, and comes up with the racial theory, which is similar to the theory propounded by the French philosopher Arthur Gobineau, Joseph Arthur Gobineau, in the mid-19th century. That theory is very clear, and that is where the Aryan race theory comes in. Since you mentioned it, I might as well make it clear so that it's absolutely transparent where Hitler's ideas about India are coming from. So according to Houston Chamberlain, according to Gobineau, and according to Hitler's Nazi ideological aide, Alfred Rosenberg, who wrote all the ideological leaflets for the Nazi party, about 1500 years ago, the Nordics, the Germans, left Europe and went across the world. One of the places they most definitely came to was India. Why are they so sure the Aryans came to India? Now I'm just telling you about the Nazi philosophy. They are so sure because William Jones and others have established the philological link between Sanskrit and Greek and Latin, and this Indo-German group of languages has come up. So what explains this similarity in the languages? The Aryans must have gone there. 1500 years ago they went there, they settled there. According to Nazi philosophy, one of the rules that the white Aryans who went on their allegedly white horses and they rode into the Indian subcontinent, like you said, from the northwest. One of the things that they did when they reached India and settled in India is that they kept a distance from the local Indian population. The local Indian population is different. And the outcome of this instinctive aversion for the local Indian population, and these are the terms used, instinctive aversion for the local Indian population, was the caste system, the Varna system. And Varna, like we all know, while it is caste, the word Varna is color. So the Nazis have arrived at this conclusion with the perversity of their thinking that the Aryans, the Germans, the Nordic people, and all those who came from Europe, they established the caste system here,
No, but this,
and they kept a distance. Yes,
Sorry.
sorry.
no, I was just about to add that in many of the earlier Sanskrit literature also, you find this Chaturvarna, the lowest Varna, is described anatomically, physically. Also, they are more like the Dravidian, the descriptions, and the Brahmins and the upper caste are more like the northwestern. We can call them Punjabi, we can call them the Persian look, we can call them the Afghan, mix or Kashmir, whatever. So what I mean is, in many of these texts also there were these color description
No,
of the ashrams.
one thing I'd like to make clear is the Nazis are by no means the only ones who are racist. We Indians are racist. So there's and
About ourselves.
Churchill, as we know, is a very famous racist. Who
Absolutely.
whose policies resulted in the death of 3 million people in 1943 in this province itself. Racism is not a quality unique to the Nazis, but what I believe is that we need to have a discussion on Nazi racism also, because we discuss, and that is one of the reasons I wrote this book. We do discuss Churchill a lot in India.
But with all of that, why didn't they zero in on the Jews? Was
Yeah,
that
so
an
if I
economic?
could, so if I could, yeah, with the Jews, of course, it was an economic, the economic cloud that the Jews had, and they had this political theory that the Jews were influencing policy and all decision making in Germany, and
Across Europe.
across Europe, exactly, not just in Germany, but across Europe. So to continue from where I left off, they established the Varna system. This is what Nazi philosophy says, and they reached the height of metaphysical thinking because they thought so deeply, and they wrote these classic Sanskrit texts, the Vedas, the Upanishads. Rosenberg even called Shankara a product of the Nordic, superb Nordic imagination and all of that. And unfortunately, according to the Nazis, what happened in the later generations was that they lost their power of metaphysical thinking primarily for one reason. They started mingling with the local population. And the result was they lost all their Aryan qualities, and the blood was contaminated to the extent that there are no Aryans left now in India, but only the local Indians, and who have contaminated the Aryans and destroyed Aryanism. So this is where the theory comes from.
And
So according to Hitler, Indians are racially inferior people. Indians do not qualify as human beings. The Nazi mouthpiece, Völkischer Beobachter, which was edited first by Rosenberg and later on by various other people as well, but Rosenberg controlled that publication, and later, of course, we know Joseph Goebbels, controlled the whole propaganda machine. That newspaper, the official Nazi newspaper, has called Indians subhuman during the years of the Third Reich. So this is the position that Hitler has on India and on Indians. Now, when he gets close, can I continue? Or you want to? Sorry, I'm sorry because
No,
I can just
we have a time factor, so no, you can certainly continue,
Yeah.
but maybe we come back to this in a question answer. You've more or less outlined
Yeah.
this, and we talked about the swastika. I was wondering why swastika was. Of course, the fact is that it was SS. It was designed the SS.
Correct.
But why was that chosen as the symbol?
Yeah, so one of the Nazi theories about their whole racial purity was that once upon a time there was a city of Atlantis where all the Nordic heroes lived, and that city one day suddenly
Went into the sea.
went into the sea and disappeared. And all the Nazi superhumans, or Nordic superhumans rather, they were trying to survive, and they got out of the island somehow before it went under and survived. And they were so scarred by the experience that they wanted to get to the roof of the world, what they call the roof of the world. And what's the roof of the world? They thought of Tibet. So they went to Tibet, to the roof of the world, and settled there. And that is where that is the place actually where they got the swastika from. Which was one of the holy symbols in Tibet. And they picked up the symbol from there. That is why they easily adopted the word Aryan, because it came from here, and they believed that the Aryans had settled here. So it was no love for India or the swastika that they took. And the swastika is not just a holy symbol in India. The swastika is a holy symbol even in Israel. Among the Jewish population, it's a holy symbol. So similarly for the Germans,
Which is why it's. I found it surprising, because on one hand he was zeroing in on the Jews, and on the other hand he was picking up these symbols.
Absolutely, yeah. So he just borrows it wholesale, thinking that these are Nordic symbols, and it's the Aryans who either took them there or developed those symbols there. But they do not belong to us in any way. So that's where it comes from. But like you mentioned, Ratnatma, the Nazis did not take the symbol in the original form, in the Indian form. They of course twisted it,
yes,
made it black. Then there is the red party background of the flag, and even behind the stark black symbol is the white sign, so that the stark black stands out even more.
Designed to kind of drive fear.
Absolutely.
Into people.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I'll share one little story. My experience in Berlin, this is 1992, the German reunification. The wall came down October 1989-90, and 92 was the formal reunification. So we were a group of journalists who were taken to Germany. Also because this was the Festival of India, and I was the arts editor, the cultural editor of the Times of India at the point. So I was in the audience when one of the performances, on the inaugural night of a Bharatnatyam or one of these dances, Bharatnatyam or one of the southern dance, it wasn't Kathak. So the girl had alta, on the fingertips, and she had a swastika. And so one elderly couple and one young lady also, at the end of the performance, they are very agitated, and they said, "Why is she sporting the swastika?" So I was called into, the girls couldn't. They are young dancers and they're not told why. This is a tradition, but why? So I was asked to answer, take up the question and clarify. So I had to tell them that two things. One is, because they are agitated because the swastika symbol is being sported and it's being celebrated in a festival. So I just point out, first and foremost, the Indian symbol is one for Ganesha. It's an abstraction of the Ganesha image. So it has the trunk, it has the hand in blessing, it has the feet, and so on. So, and it's facing the opposite direction, actually. Indian swastika faces the opposite direction. And we always have it in red, normally, with yellow, haldi and kumkum colors, normally. And the other thing I have to point out specifically, that dance, particularly the southern dances, were held in the temple courtyards, including Kathak. Kathak actually originated in temples. So these were in temple courtyards, usually in the evening, after the lamps were lit, dim lights, the audience was sitting out there, not so close, and the dancers were, doing mudras and gestures and footwork, which they would not follow if the fingers were not outlined. So that kind of appeased them, and they could carry on. They did not leave the auditorium. So that was about swastika, but the fact remained that people, even in 1992, they were so horrified, 50 years almost after Hitler had ceased to be, they abhorred any signs and symbols.
Yeah, you spoke about a section of the German population that now of course all of the German population abhors Hitler. But even when Hitler was making tremendous political progress as the leader of the Nazi Party in the early 1930s, there were two factions within the Nazi Party. One was the faction led by Hitler, which focused on the word Nazi in national in the name of the Nazi Party, and the other faction was led by a German parliamentarian called Gregor Strasser. His faction focused on the word socialist in the name of the party.
Yes.
And one of the points of contention between these two factions was what policy do we adopt towards the colonized people who are fighting for independence. Hitler was of the opinion that Germany should not stand in solidarity with any of these countries. And Strasser's group was of the opinion that no, we have to support not the haves but the have-nots, like the Indians, the Egyptians and the others. And there is a bitter divide in the party. And Hitler is getting very close to the business people and to industry, and Strasser's faction is supporting labor strikes in Germany and doing all of that in the 1928 to 1930 years.
That was symbolized later by the East Germans.
Correct, absolutely, yeah. So, what happens is at one point this friction comes to a head. The Strasser brothers, Gregor and his younger brothers Otto, they run a number of Nazi newspapers. Actually, they control most of the Nazi newspapers. And they start writing articles in their newspapers in favor of India's demand for freedom. And Hitler gets extremely upset. And he gets so upset that one day he summons the younger Strasser brother, Otto Strasser, to a hotel in Berlin. And he says, I want to meet you because I want to discuss certain things with you. And the immediate trigger for that meeting is a piece written about India by a guy called Count Reventlow, who's written a piece in favor of Indian freedom. And Hitler says, what is this that you're publishing there? We are not supposed to be favoring these people. And then there is an argument that happens. This argument covers various subjects, including the subject of Indian independence, and it goes on for 7 hours in that Berlin hotel. And the written record establishes what Hitler said on that occasion. And he said, didn't you speak up openly in favor of the Indian independence movement? Don't you realize that it's only a movement of the racially inferior Hindus and we want to have nothing to do with it? And Otto Strasser retaliates, saying that no, we believe that Germany must stand by the weaker nations of the earth and not. He says, no, you don't understand. The world functions on the basis of the racial principle. Okay, I've got a warning sign now. And we have to stick to that principle. So you cannot be supporting, India's demand for freedom because they are racially inferior people. And the argument is inconclusive, of course. Hitler, because of his passionate oratory and because of his popularity, soon takes control of the party. The Strassers are sidelined gradually in such a manner that they lose control of all the Nazi newspapers. And Joseph Goebbels, who's originally in the Strasser faction and supports the cause of Indian independence, then makes a U-turn and joins the Hitler camp. And Otto Strasser is forced to leave Germany as soon as the Nazis come to power, and Gregor Strasser, the elder brother, one of the earliest German parliamentarians, and a hugely popular face, as popular as Hitler was, in the northern parts of Germany at that point in time. In 1934, and Gregor Strasser is convinced that Hitler is the man to lead Germany. He never questions his leadership. And he's a genius, he needs to be around, that to lead Germany, he sincerely believes in that. In 1934, he's having dinner at his home in Munich. The Gestapo come calling, they knock at the door, they enter, there's a revolver in the back of the head, gunshots. Gregor Strasser, a firm believer in Hitler, a very close aide and associate of Hitler, is shot dead. So this is what happens between these two factions in the early 1930s. Then to carry the trajectory.
After the 30s,
Yeah.
The story and the scenario, everything changes.
Changes, yes.
The pitch goes up.
Yeah.
The mood changes.
Yeah.
Since one warning sound has been silently given out, I'll directly come to some of the names. Of course, we have to come to Netaji, but before that, Dhyan Chand. There is a popular story that Hitler didn't expect the Indians to win the hockey. I'm sure the others also know, so I'm not going into the background, that Indians were not supposed to win the hockey Olympics, at the Olympics. But when they did by 8 goals, he apparently, this is a popular story, this is also, I think because it's fictionalized like Bhag Milkha, I think it has also been made into a film. But he apparently, like Ayub Khan, who says flying sick, he apparently asked to meet Dhyan Chand, and he said that please, no, you can lead your team into victory, so join us. And he was a corporal, a very lowly person in the military, and he said, thank you for your offer, but I'm an Indian and I would prefer to remain in India, even as a lowly corporal.
Yeah.
How much of this
We've
is
all
true?
heard this story. This is a completely fake news story from the pre-WhatsApp era. There is no truth, not a semblance of truth to this story. Hitler never wanted to host the Berlin Olympics in 1936 because he did not want the Jews, the Slavs, the brown people and the black people of color to contaminate German soil by landing there. But the problem was the Weimar Republic, the government before the Nazis came to power, Germany's experiment with democracy, that government had agreed to host the Olympics, and you could not go back on that agreement so easily because we all know that Olympic host nations are decided years in advance, more than a decade sometimes in advance. Then a section of the Nazi party convinces Hitler that why not use these Berlin Games for propaganda purposes. Since we are being criticized because more and more Jews are being attacked, there are these go back Jews placards all over and posters all over the streets in Germany's big cities. Then we all know that they took off those posters to project a clean image. And the Indian team goes there. They are a bunch of champions anyway, Dhyan Chand and the others, because they won in 1928, 1932. And in the entire tournament, they lose only 1 goal, and that is to Germany in the final. And still they win 8-1 against Germany. And Dhyan Chand scores 11 goals in the tournament in all. His brother Roop Chand scores another 11 goals in Germany. And every team is just smashed. Actually, it's not just a win, they're destroyed. Because it's 8-0, 7-0, 11-0, 9-0. But Germany scores 1 goal in the final, but they are beaten 8-1. Oh, okay, time's up. I'll just finish this quickly. So, I have been through all the records, I have been through all the publications of that period, through all the newspapers of that period. There is no written, oral, video evidence, no audio evidence, nothing to suggest that Hitler offered him, Dhyan Chand, a position in the German Reich, as in the army. Now, Dhyan Chand has written his autobiography where he says the closest they got to the Nazi leadership was when they saw Hermann Göring from a distance. There is no way Dhyan Chand is not going to write in his autobiography that they met Hitler and they shook hands with. He also talks about the glimpse of Hitler they had when Hitler was in the stands, and that was a distant glimpse. And remember, Dhyan Chand is writing in the 1950s when Hitler was not such an untouchable. Now, of course, he's a much bigger villain than he was at that time. And the whole research on Nazi atrocities truly began globally in the real sense in the 1970s, when the truth about the concentration camps began to come out in much greater detail. So there was no reason for Dhyan Chand to deny the fact that he met Hitler or that Hitler offered him citizenship of the Third Reich and told him, why don't you join the German army? There is nothing. Not a single contemporary of his has said it. Not a single fellow player. Dhyan Chand himself did not say anything. Unfortunately, people associated with Dhyan Chand from subsequent generations started selling this story.
Now this is 2 minutes after the 2 minutes over.
Sorry.
So it's question answer time, and I'm going to usurp my right to ask him one more question on behalf of everybody else. Dhyan Chand, false story, but Netaji, he was not called Netaji at that point. Subhash Chandra Bose, when he went to Berlin, Hitler, he sort of gave him a long rope. He didn't really immediately give him time, and after he gave time also to twice he called it off. But then he did meet, because he was the leader of the Indian, Azad Hind Fauj, what was the full German thing? Legion. Some Indian National or Indian Liberation Legion?
Indian Legion, yeah.
Indian Legion. And he did meet Netaji. The photographs are there, not only the photographs, but also the story, not only from Subhash's side, but also he had the secretary, and Hitler's group had all these, Goering and Goebbels and Himmler, all with him. So this is a recorded fact, and he met him because he thought he was an antidote to Gandhi, for whom he had unmitigated hatred. Gandhi was the fakir, and Gandhi had done this act of writing a letter advising him to not stop the war and not go ahead with his Hindsa. First in 1929 and then again in 30, before the war or during the war.
During the war.
This first letter had gone out just before Hitler attacks Poland, which sets off the war. So as close to that, an unmitigated hatred. But when he meets Netaji, Subhash, we'll come to, Vaibhav will answer how much of that is actually hatred and how much. Netaji, he didn't give the appointments right away, but he did meet, and when he did meet, Netaji told him to do away with the Mein Kampf chapters where he talks, with so much hatred for India, which Hitler obviously didn't like. He was a vain person and he hated that. So he turned around, looked at the maps on the wall of Europe and Asia, and he pointed out that Netaji asked him, and he was also very diplomatic. He told him that we are expecting support in this war from you. You are a very able commander, and the flattery goes well with him. So he says, but why should I go to India? It doesn't make sense. Only after Russia is decimated, we'll try to, because if I try to attack Britain now over all this land, it will be disaster. I can't fly planes, nor should you. So two things emerged out of that. One was he talked about taking the submarine. He said you should not go because British forces, Egypt and Western Asia now, was also British supremacy. And he talks about taking the submarine, which Netaji does actually. And he says that you've got two very good help, Italy and Japan. Subsequently, they were to be his support system. And he points out the area, Manipur and Burma border, and he says that this is where the British are weak. So this is where, if you get any support, then you should go.
Yeah, over to you. I will need a few minutes to talk about Gandhi and
Everybody okay with
Netaji, because it's a very complicated relationship that these Indians are having with the Third Reich, two of our tallest leaders. Now, Gandhi is somebody that Hitler obviously hates. I'm going to tell you about an anecdote which will again reveal one of the reasons I wrote this book, that these are completely forgotten chapters of Indian history. In the year 1938, Lord Halifax goes to meet Hitler, and Britain, war clouds are on the horizon. Britain wants to avoid a war. Hitler has started invading Austria. He's about to gobble up Czechoslovakia, and nobody's stopping him. And Britain is somehow trying to avoid that conflict. So when Lord Halifax goes to meet him, Hitler suddenly, he had a habit that he would go on and on when he started. So he starts giving Lord Halifax unsolicited advice about what to do about Indians and the Indian situation. He says, you guys have got a problem in India. And this is all written, okay? This is all written documentary records that that I've obtained. You guys got a problem in India. You don't know how to deal with that problem. He says, it's very easy to sort out the Indian problem. He says, shoot Gandhi. So Lord Halifax is a little taken aback. He's saying, shoot Gandhi. He says, if that doesn't work, shoot 50 other Congress leaders. So again, he's a little taken aback. He says, if that doesn't work, shoot 200 more people, and that will take care of his situation. Now, this is an interesting thing because, firstly, we are never taught about these things. We are never told about these things. Lord Halifax has tremendous experience in diplomacy. Hitler has never visited India. He has never been to India. Lord Halifax, on the other hand, is the former Lord Irwin, who has clinched the 1931 Gandhi-Irwin Pact. And he has spent a lot of time in India. He knows India much better than Hitler does. But the sheer audacity that, you guys don't know how to handle the Indians, you're giving them too much liberty, just shoot them. And start with shooting Gandhi. This is the kind of approach he has towards Gandhi. Gandhi, interestingly, complicates the situation for himself in the year 1938. Of course, he doesn't know that Hitler has said it to Halifax. That comes out only later when all the minutes of the meeting are recorded. But when Hitler starts attacking the Jews, and in 1938 the violence really increased across Germany. And we know the night of the broken glass, Kristallnacht, and all of that happens. So Gandhi again gives like Hitler has given an advice to Halifax, Gandhi gives advice to the Jews about how to deal with Hitler. He says, you must offer total non-violence to him. You must fight him with non-violence. And there is tremendous anger among the Jews. And there is very interesting correspondence between Gandhi and several Jewish scholars, some of which I have quoted in my book, about how angry they really are. They ask the Mahatma, do you even know what Hitler is all about? You are asking us to fight him with non-violence? The British at the most will throw you into a prison and won't do anything else. Maybe lathi charge you. But the moment we speak a word, we are killed. He says you have no clue what things are about, and you are talking about non-violence, us preaching non-violence to us. Then Gandhi again makes the situation worse for himself. by defending himself and by criticizing the Jews. He says that you don't have real non-violence in your hearts. You wish Hitler ill. You also wish that the Nazis and Germans should die because there is no pure non-violence in your hearts. So, all of that.
And he goes on to support the British.
Yeah, and then he attacks, and then he's further attacked by the Jewish scholars. They say, what are you talking about, do you have any idea of what's going on here? And please don't offer this suggestion. Then later he offers the same suggestion to the British during the war, that if Hitler invades, allow him to take your waters, allow him to take your homes. That these are the famous lines that Gandhi writes about. And then the British, the citizens in London and elsewhere are upset, saying, what is this? They allow him to take. And the Jews and the British both are convinced that he has absolutely no idea of the nature of the Hitler Raj, of the regime, and how Hitler needs to be dealt with, and the fact that Hitler and Stalin are completely indifferent to any kind of human feeling. So this is Hitler, interestingly, in his conversation with Otto Strasser, which I mentioned earlier in that Berlin hotel, says that the admiration of Mahatma Gandhi is, in my opinion, a racial perversity. And I've quoted him in the book. He says it's all part of the written record. So this is the kind of a reaction to Gandhi that he has. Netaji is a much more complicated relationship. When Hitler comes to power in 1933, a number of Indians studying and living in Germany are assaulted, thrown into prison, attacked, held for days without charge in Nazi prisons, and thrown out of Germany, deported. Among them is A.C.N. Nambiar, who heads the Indian Information Bureau in Berlin. Among them is Sarojini Naidu's son, Jayasurya Naidu, who is a student of mathematics at the Berlin University. He's thrown into prison, into a Nazi prison, on account of suspicion that he is a communist. Rabindranath Tagore's grandnephew, Saumendranath Tagore, who is a confirmed communist, is picked up on the borders of Germany. He's gone to get treatment for his tuberculosis outside Germany, and when he's returning, he's held at the border, and he's arrested on the charge of plotting to assassinate Adolf Hitler. And he's thrown into prison for 25 days. In fact, Saumendranath Tagore is held in prison. And 8 to 10 Indians are similarly, these are very prominent Indians, by the way. These are not unknown people. This is a grandnephew of Rabindranath Tagore. This is Sarojini Naidu's son. This is A.C.N. Nambiar, a very close colleague of Pandit Nehru, who was instrumental in Nehru going to Brussels in 1927 for the League Against Colonialism and the oppressed League of the Oppressed Nations Conference. Pandit Nehru's debut on the international stage, he was instrumental in that. So all these prominent people are arrested, and Nambiar is told to leave Germany within a week, and his passport is confiscated, everything is confiscated, all of this is done. That's why I'm saying it's a forgotten chapter of Indian history, we have never taught about it. A well-meaning British parliamentarian, Josiah Wedgwood, a liberal parliamentarian, raises this issue in the British Parliament, and that's how some noise is created. And Hitler is supposed to release these people because Hitler wants Britain on his side at that point in time. When this happens, Netaji, who's suffering from pneumonia and tuberculosis in 1933, goes to Europe for his recovery and recuperation, and he gets to hear all of these stories, and he's horrified, and he urgently seeks a meeting with Hitler in 1933. He says that Hitler has made anti-India remarks in his autobiography. I want to talk to him. I want to tell him that these remarks must be deleted. They do not do that. In 1934, the violence against Indians in Germany worsens because students on the streets in Berlin and Munich are called Negroes. Netaji himself is called a Negro, taunted as a Negro on the streets of Berlin and Munich. And he's written about that. And stones are hurled at Indian students on the streets of Germany by these Nazis. And a number of Indian students protest and write protest letters to Hitler and to all the ministers of the Third Reich. And who is the person writing all these letters on their behalf? It is Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. He writes these protest letters saying that this regime is racist, it is anti-Indian, and this is unacceptable to us. Please stop this and delete your anti-India remarks, because it's Germany is not now a powerful nation, and we do we Indians are, just because we don't have a voice, we are ruled by Britain, doesn't mean we are going to keep quiet. Netaji is so disappointed by the year 1936 when he's coming back to India. In the year 1936, Hitler at a speech in Munich, speaking to Nazi students, makes a statement saying that again he's holding up the British as this example of the white man's excellence. And he says, you know what? The Indians didn't even know how to walk. The British went to India and they taught them how to walk. And that's how they learned how to walk. And that is when the Modern Review in Calcutta, the Amrita Bazar Patrika, the Marathi newspapers in my part of the country, Hindi newspapers in northern India, and all of these people, they protest very strongly. And Netaji is leaving Munich and he's interviewed by a media representative, and he says, I'm extremely disappointed, I'm not even in a mood to talk after hearing Hitler's remarks about India and the Indian people. If Nazi, and these are the words I've quoted him in my book, if Nazi Germany wants to lick the boots of the Britishers, they are welcome to do that, but they should not think that Indians will take things lying down. We will not stomach these insults, and you have to stop saying these things about Indians. You started with your autobiography and you've been going on and on. Now this is the background, okay? So he's not an admirer of the Nazis by any stretch of the imagination. He's very stoutly opposed to the Nazis. In 1938, he's elected as Congress president, and in the following year, he's denied a second term as Congress president and gradually pushed to the sidelines, after which the war breaks out and he is looking for some opportunity to put pressure on Britain. And in 1938, Hitler has a string of successes. He conquers Australia, Czechoslovakia. After the war begins, they take over Poland. Stalin and he join hands. And Netaji is much influenced by the fact that Stalin and Hitler have joined hands, because he firmly believes that the Soviet Union is pretty popular in India and it will be acceptable to the Indian population. Whereas he is very clear that in India, at that point in time, which is even clear by the archives from the archives that I saw, the Indian perception about the Nazis and Nazi Germany is entirely negative. And Netaji says so in so many words, that because of Russia, you will be taken seriously in India, otherwise you will not, even after he goes there. And he initially doesn't want to go to Germany at all, he wants to go to Russia. But because and to Italy, and the Italians are enthusiastic, so they take the initiative, and we all know how he got here. You know better than I do here in Calcutta, but in Kolkata, sorry. But he goes there and he has a really difficult time. From what I saw in the archives, he has a really difficult time, because see, we are told about the radio, we are told about the broadcast, we are told about his struggle that he waged for the purpose of Indian independence. But what a difficult time he had. He says, he goes there, he says, I want to meet Hitler. He's denied a meeting with Hitler. He's told he's too busy, Hitler is too busy. Then he says, they want to use him for propaganda purposes. Their interest now, suddenly, that now that Germany cannot enter into an alliance with Britain, is that, okay, now at least use Netaji Bose as a propaganda vehicle, especially because he's an extremely popular leader, and the young generation is inspired by him, so let's use him. But Netaji turns out not to be so easy as they think he is, because he says, give me a declaration in favor of free India. He demands a declaration from Germany, Japan and Italy. They refuse. For more than a year they refuse. He keeps on asking. He meets Ribbentrop, who's the foreign minister, and he tells him that I want to meet Hitler. Ribbentrop says he's too busy. But then he says, you please delete those remarks from Mein Kampf, because they're going to create a problem. Anyway, your image is that you are anti-Indian, and because of Russia, you will be acceptable, but still you delete those remarks. He says no. Then he says, give me a declaration in favor of free India. Otherwise, it's not so easy to do these broadcasts, because why should I do that? Just because you're asking me to do propaganda. And the Free India Center and all of that. But Netaji is very clear when he is in Germany that the Free India Center and all of that is not so important. The declaration is important, because that will give some weight to the Indian demand for
Some ground under his feet.
at a time when Britain is facing the heat from these guys who are quite successful in the war until that period, 39-40. Then in the middle of 1941, Hitler goes and invades Russia. And in fact, Netaji is most upset. He tells his Nazi interlocutors, I have quoted him in the book, that now it's going to be very difficult for people to trust Nazi Germany, because if you were with Russia, you would have been acceptable, but now it's going to be difficult. And the Nazis are also so frustrated, he refuses to start the propaganda against the British Raj until he gets that declaration. And at one point, they're so frustrated that one of them has written that the political office of the German foreign office, the political office was filled with Nazis, and fortunately, the people whom Netaji was mostly dealing with were anti-Nazis in the foreign office, like Adam von Trott, who was later hanged for the plot to kill Hitler in 1944. So the political department guys are all Nazis, and they contemplate sending him to Switzerland, to a neutral place like Switzerland, because he's turning out to be far too much of a trouble, not a liability, but trouble, because he keeps pushing for the demand, and he will not do the bidding of the Nazis until they give him a declaration in favor of free independence. So this is a very difficult relationship, a very difficult time for him. He keeps pushing the boundaries, and he knows the whole picture, and still, because he's obsessed with the idea of Indian freedom, and he's obsessed with the idea of
and people don't know what length he can go.
Yeah, to do that, he's completely put his everything aside in the and the idea of Indian freedom in his mind, and he's working towards that. He gets so frustrated that he tries to have a meeting with Mussolini, and Mussolini finally agrees. Mussolini is more favorably inclined towards meeting Indian leaders than Hitler at any time, because he met Rabindranath also earlier, after which the the Mussolini's brother's newspaper said that this Rabindranath is I'm sorry, I'm saying this in Calcutta, but this is what the Italians are saying, and this is no. In fact, we need to discuss these things, because we must also know what they said about our people, and people who are icons in our society. And I may not be a Kolkatan, but
We are an Indian.
Rabindranath and Bose for me are iconic figures, and as much as for anyone else. So after that, Mussolini's brother's paper writes that he is actually a Jew. Rabindranath Tagore is actually a Jew because his name is Rabbi. He's a rabbi. So his friends called him Rabbi. So he says actually he's a rabbi. So he's Rabbi. So he's a Jew.
Okay.
So, and this is what they write in the editorial in their newspapers. So this is the extent of racism and the anti-Semitism and all of that. But to get back to Bose, Mussolini meets him, and then Hitler's pride is wounded. And what happens is, despite Hitler's repeated rejections, Mussolini agrees to issue a demand in favor of Indian freedom. Then Japan agrees to issue a demand in favor of Indian freedom. The only hold-up is Hitler. Hitler keeps saying no. Japan tells him, writes to him. Mussolini talks to him. But finally, at least he agrees to meet Bose. After more than a year of waiting, he meets Bose. And it is in this meeting, as Ratnottama correctly said, that Bose actually brings up the issue of Mein Kampf. And I think it takes a tremendous sense of integrity to do that, to bring it up. Only one thing I'd like to say here, Ratnottama, is that yes, Hitler did point him to east of Asia, but it was not because of Hitler that he went there. Netaji was convinced that there was nothing left for him to do in Nazi Germany, and Japan was winning a series of successes in Eastern Asia, and Netaji wanted to be as close to India's borders as he could, so that the fight could actually be taken into the Indian territory, and that was the only way he could do that. And Hitler was convinced he would do nothing. But he said that Japan's help is not enough.
It was strategic. Malaysia.
Yeah, absolutely. So he, in fact, Netaji. So even in Paul Schmidt's, the interpreter of that conversation, Paul Schmidt, Hitler's associate, wrote down minutes of that conversation, 7 pages, out of which Hitler takes up 6 pages, because Hitler would, once he would start, it would be a monologue, and he wouldn't even allow anyone to get a word in. So Netaji actually tells him that he wants to go to Japan, to East Asia, not to Japan, but to East Asia, so that he can take the fight from there into India. And it is then that Hitler says that yes, that is the better way, and don't fly, you are too important to fly, and all that. All that, a bit of flattery he does, because that is diplomatism, that is diplomatic talk, of course. But the outcome of that thing is he does get a submarine, no doubt, absolutely, he does get a submarine, but Hitler still does not issue a declaration in favor of Indian independence. Bose asks him for it, he says no.
He refuses.
And it was only days before he committed suicide in that bunker that Hitler agreed to that declaration in favor of Indian independence, and that was because he had to clutch at anything at that point in time. So the only reason I thought I should explain this in detail is it's an extremely complicated relationship, and I think we need to discuss it in detail. I think the more we discuss it, the better it is for.
Vaibhav's passion is absolutely clear to every single person. I was wondering if you are going to walk away. So I even decided to bring in Bollywood. I just very briefly, no, I'm not going to ask Vaibhav about this, but I'm going to tell you that India, Bombay Talkies, which eventually sort of led us to Bollywood and its presence all over the globe. Bombay Talkies founders Himanshu Rai, Devika Rani, they had a very close link with Germany. Devika Rani married Himanshu Rai, but after that, already he had made a film, Throw of Dice. After that, they went to Germany, where in UFA studios, she learned acting under Max Reinhardt, who influenced Lubitsch. Max Reinhardt was a very big name in theatre worldwide, and Lubitsch is a very big name of cinema. He went subsequently to America and made films there, which are still examples of German expressionism and influenced Himanshu Rai. But why am I telling all this is because Himanshu Rai eventually, after the film Karma, he comes to India. Karma is applauded but flops miserably, particularly in India. And by then, Hitler is on the rise, and they've gone from Germany to London, and it's not so easy in 1931-32 to be there and be making films. So they come to India, back to Bombay, with a German director, Franz Osten, and cameraman Joseph Wershing, and some other people as well, who were from Germany and was assisting. So these people stay on, but why? When Bombay Talkies breaks up, 1940, Himanshu Rai dies, and after that the British also they agree to Hitler, and they want all the Germans out. Germans and the Poles in India, they are all pushed out. So Joseph Wershing and Austen, all of these people have to leave. So that is a very strong impact of Hitler's rise and his evil impact on India in a certain way. But there is another story, very briefly. He's not going to dance at the thought, but Madam Menaka, and she's not to be mixed up with the Apsara. Madam Menaka was actually Bangladesh-born Bangali, Borishal-born Bangali, and her name was Leela Shokhi. Leela Shokhi, not Shokhi, Leela Roy, eventually becomes Leela Shokhi, Sokhi actually, not Shokhi. She started a troupe. She was in Germany in 1936 for the same Berlin Olympiad. They had parallelly started a dance Olympiad. And why? Because dance is also a form of building body. So the whole concept of masculinity gets transformed, and they start this dance Olympiad where Pina Bausch refuses to dance or is not given a chance to dance. Ted Shawn, who's a very big name of contemporary dance today, Ted Shawn dances. Pina Bausch had actually danced under Ted Shawn at one point of time. And Madame Menaka gets a chance to dance, which is why she also got to act in German films. The Tiger of Eshnapur, the second version. First version came out in 1919, the second version in 1939, and the third version in 1959, long after the war. Why am I going into all these details? Once again, because Madame Menaka had a very big influence in taking Kathak to Bombay and eventually into Bollywood dance and Indian dance also, because Roshan Kumari and all are from Bombay essentially, and she danced in Satyajit's film, George Sagar.
Fascinating. This is absolutely fascinating.
And
Interesting
to
conversation.
clinch, finally,
Because this
and to clinch finally, you'll be even more fascinated to know that after Achut Kanya was released, this is 1936, it's against untouchability. Hitler wrote a letter to Ashok Kumar, Dadamani, congratulating him. Dadamani got the letter, this is 1936, post 36, it could have been 37, and he tears it up. So Bharati Di, his daughter, tells me, I'd asked Papa, why did he tear up? It's a historical document. So he says, what? The Nazis were going up and up, and they were on the rise. You don't deal with such, you don't even touch such people. So there went down one of our Bollywood records of Hitler praising Achut Kanya.
Interesting, fascinating business. Interestingly, there's a mention in my book about. I just take 30 seconds now. About Hitler's.
She's run out of her placards. I'm so happy.
Yeah, no more placards left. So, Hitler's favorite movie, which he is obsessed with, is an anti-India movie called The Lives of the Bengal Lancer. I don't know if anyone of you has seen it. Bengal Lancers.
Okay.
And I mentioned that he had this private cinema in his at his mountain residence at the Bectus Garden, and he would watch it in the evenings, and he would call his guests and all his people and say, and he would one of the officials has written that he would rub his hands and say that it's starting every time. He would get excited because the film shows how the British have subjugated the Indian population and succeeded in keeping them down. The Lives of the Bengal Lancer.
His guru. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, we extended time, but I think we are the richer for it. Really, it was really engaging and excellent. It was very, very interesting. On behalf of the foundation, I would like to thank Mr. Vaibhav Purandare and Ms. Ratnotama Sengupta for the engaging session. I would also like to show my gratitude towards our presenter, Shree Cements Limited. I also take this opportunity to express thanks to our hospitality partner, Taj Bengal Kolkata, and media partner, Ms. My Kolkata, The Telegraph Online. Last but not the least, I would like to show appreciation towards our patrons, without whom today's session would not have been successful. You are our constant support and strength. Stay well, stay safe, and goodbye. And before we end, can I ask Debashri Nazir to please present our guests with a very small memento of our gratitude. That's wonderful.
Thank you. Actually, this is exactly what I've taken for one of our ambassadors today.
Really? That's nice. Can we take a picture?
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
you're welcome. Take a picture. Put the tray down. Y'all can all collect a copy of the book, and I'm sure Vaibhav would be happy to sign it for us.
And
It's been an honor and a privilege to have been in Calcutta at the invitation of the Prabha Khaitan Foundation to speak about my books and writing. I had a splendid session on my books and writing, especially on my new book Hitler in India, and I got tremendous hospitality, a great reception, superb treatment, and it was a fantastic session organized by the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. They're active throughout India, and considering the kind of interaction and session I've had on my books and writing here, I would love to be part of sessions that the organization, the foundation organizes across India. It's active in all of India's major cities. So would love to be there, to interact with genuine book lovers, because Prabha Khaitan Foundation really connects a writer with genuine book lovers. Thanks. Is that okay?